I thought my clutter was harmless, until the day I tripped over a box and nearly hit the floor. My heart raced as I caught myself on the edge of a chair, and for the first time, I saw my home not as a sanctuary, but as a danger zone. The piles of papers, boxes stacked in corners, and forgotten belongings weren't memories keeping me safe. They were obstacles waiting to steal my independence. At 68, I've faced many challenges, but nothing shook me like realizing my own possessions could send me to the hospital or worse. It wasn't just about falling, it was about what that fall would mean. A broken hip could take away my freedom, force me into assisted living, and leave me watching life pass from the sidelines. In that moment, I understood that clutter wasn't sentimental, it was a silent thief. And I knew something had to change. Before I share what happened next, don't just like this video, hype it, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories like mine. My name is Mary. I'm 68 years old, a retired teacher living alone in Ohio. Teaching was my calling for more than 3 decades, and in those years I poured my energy into shaping young minds, raising my 2 children, and caring for a husband I loved deeply until the day I lost him. When retirement came, I thought it would be a season of rest and reflection, but instead it became a season of holding on. I clung to everything that carried a memory: lesson plans from my teaching years, artwork from my children's elementary school days, stacks of greeting cards, shelves of books I promised myself I would reread, and even kitchen gadgets I hadn't touched in years. Each object felt like a thread tying me to the people and times I feared losing. At first, it felt comforting. My home was filled with echoes of the past. But slowly, the weight of those things shifted. Rooms once filled with warmth became suffocated with boxes and bags. Closets could no longer close. The dining table, where we once laughed over Sunday dinners, disappeared beneath piles of unopened mail, old newspapers, and half-finished projects. My living room, which should have been a place for family gatherings, turned into a maze of furniture I no longer used and stacks of keepsakes I was afraid to let go of. It wasn't a home anymore, it was a storage unit with my name on the lease. Deep down, I thought saving everything would keep my family close. I told myself that one day my children would want the dishes from their grandmother, or the toys they played with in the 80s, or the notes their father once scribbled. But the truth was, they had built lives of their own. They wanted new memories, not to inherit the weight of mine. What I saw as love, they quietly saw as clutter. I didn't recognize it at the time, but my fear of letting go was building walls between us. Instead of making space for visits, I was unintentionally pushing them away, with a house too crowded to welcome them in. That realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly. Each time my children hesitated to bring the grandkids over, each time I chose not to invite a neighbor inside, each time I walked through my own hallway and felt like a stranger in the place I once called home. And though I didn't want to admit it, I knew my grip on the past was keeping me from living the present, and if I didn't face it, it might rob me of the future too. My doctor warned me that clutter was a fall risk, but at first, I brushed it off. I told myself I was careful, that I knew every corner of my home by heart. But the truth is, no matter how careful you are, all it takes is one wrong step. During my annual wellness visit, she looked me square in the eyes and said, "Mary, a fall at your age can change everything. A broken hip isn't just painful, it can take away your independence permanently." Those words echoed in my head long after I left her office. I had spent a lifetime standing on my own 2 feet, raising children, working, paying bills, and keeping life in order. The idea of suddenly depending on others because of a fall in my own living room shook me more than I wanted to admit. At the same time, my kids began to notice the state of the house whenever they came by. They didn't come out and say it, but their comments carried weight. "Mom, do you think you should move into a smaller place? Mom, maybe you'd feel safer if you lived closer to us." I knew what they were really saying. They were worried I couldn't manage on my own anymore. And the thought of them discussing it behind my back, possibly planning for assisted living without my say, terrified me. I wasn't ready to give up my home, my routines, or my freedom. The piles of boxes weren't just blocking hallways. They were putting my future in jeopardy. That was when it hit me. This wasn't about clutter anymore. This was about control, dignity, and independence. If I kept ignoring the problem, I might not have a choice in the matter much longer. A single fall could hand over decisions about my life to someone else. I didn't want my children to see me as fragile. I didn't want a doctor or a facility to decide where I lived. I wanted to make that choice myself while I still could. That realization was more terrifying than letting go of my things. In that moment, I knew I had to face the truth. Either I took back control, or the clutter would eventually take it from me. Hallways narrowed until I had to turn sideways to pass. The kitchen table disappeared under stacks of unopened mail, magazines, and half-finished projects. Every corner whispered with dust, reminding me that I hadn't truly lived in these spaces for years. My living room no longer felt like a place to relax. It felt like an obstacle course. The couch was buried under old quilts and boxes I promised myself I'd sort someday. Even my bedroom, the one place meant for rest, was crowded with bags of clothes that no longer fit, books I hadn't read in decades, and drawers jammed so tight they wouldn't close. It wasn't just clutter. It was chaos quietly taking over my life. But the hardest part wasn't the mess, it was the memories. Every item seemed to hold a voice from the past. My husband's old jacket still carried his scent. My children's school projects, yellowed with time, reminded me of afternoons at the kitchen table when their laughter filled the room. Even a chipped mug made me hesitate because it had once held coffee during conversations I never wanted to forget. Letting go didn't feel like tossing away objects. It felt like betraying the people and moments that shaped me. What made it worse was the way the clutter began to control my emotions. Each time I tried to clean, guilt crept in. I would pick up a sweater, only to think, what if one of the kids wants this someday? Or I'd open a box of letters and feel tears rising until I quietly closed the lid and shoved it back into the corner. Days turned into weeks and weeks into years. Meanwhile, the piles grew higher and the walls seemed to close in tighter. For anyone watching this who's over 60, you'll understand, clutter isn't just stuff. It's a lifetime of choices, losses, and love packed into boxes. And that makes it harder to part with. But the truth I couldn't see then was that while I thought I was protecting my memories, I was actually burying myself under them. I wasn't just losing space in my home. I was losing space in my heart to live fully in the present. One evening, my granddaughter looked at me with big eyes and asked, "Grandma, why can't I sleep over here? There's no space." Her innocent words hit me harder than any warning from a doctor ever could. In that small voice, I heard the truth I had been avoiding for years. She didn't see the sentimental value of the things I clung to. She saw what my home had become, a place too crowded for her to play, too messy to spread out a sleeping bag, too full for us to share the simple joy of a sleepover. And in that moment, I felt something inside me break. I realized that the clutter wasn't just suffocating me, it was shutting out the very people I loved most. My home, which once held family dinners and birthday parties, was now a place my grandchildren couldn't even enjoy. What good were boxes of old clothes or stacks of papers if they stole the sound of laughter from my walls? What value did my memories have if they left no room for new ones? That night, I sat at the edge of my bed and admitted the truth. The clutter was costing me more than I could bear. It wasn't about dusty boxes or crowded hallways anymore. It was about legacy. What would my children and grandchildren remember about me? Would they remember a grandmother who opened her doors with warmth, or one who let possessions build barriers between us? The thought of being remembered for my stuff, instead of my love, was unbearable. So I made a decision. It wasn't a grand, sweeping plan at first, just a quiet promise to myself. I will take back my home. I will take back my freedom. I will make space for the people I love. That single shift in mindset changed everything. The clutter had always felt too overwhelming, but now I had a reason bigger than fear. I wasn't decluttering to get rid of things. I was decluttering to make room for my granddaughter's laughter, for family dinners at the table, for sleepovers on the living room floor. For anyone over 60, you know how powerful those moments are. They remind us that life isn't measured by the objects we keep, but by the memories we make. That night, with my granddaughter's questions still echoing in my ears, I decided it was time to change. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now. And for the first time in years, I felt hope that my home could become a place of joy again. I started small, one drawer, one closet. At first, the thought of clearing out an entire house paralyzed me, so I gave myself permission to begin with just what I could handle. I told myself, Mary, if you can sort through one drawer today, you've won. And that tiny win gave me courage to keep going. I set up 3 boxes. Keep, donate, discard. It was simple in theory, but each choice carried weight. That's when I decided to call it my legacy sorting system. Instead of asking, do I want this? I asked, does this truly tell my story? Will it matter to the people I love when I'm gone? That question changed everything. It freed me from guilt and gave each decision a sense of purpose. I began with the small things. In my nightstand, I found receipts from decades ago and broken pens I didn't even remember putting there. Tossing them was easy. Then came the harder discoveries, letters from my students, thank you notes from parents, and handmade cards from my kids when they were little. I didn't want to lose those memories, but I also couldn't keep every scrap of paper. So I made a rule. I would digitize memories. I bought a simple scanner and started uploading photos, letters, and cards. Suddenly, I realized I could preserve the love without drowning in the paper. My granddaughter even helped me create a digital family album, and that turned what could have been a painful process into a bonding experience. Then came the closets. Clothes I hadn't worn in 20 years still hung there, some with price tags attached. I laughed at myself when I found a jacket 2 sizes too small that I swore I would get back into someday. Letting it go felt like admitting that day wasn't coming, but it also felt like releasing a burden I didn't need to carry. I donated it, hoping someone else could put it to good use. Each bag I filled for donation didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like generosity. The kitchen was harder. Every dish, every pan seemed to belong to a holiday memory. But I asked myself, do I need 4 casserole dishes for the woman I am now? Or was I holding on to them for the woman I used to be? I kept the ones I used and I donated the rest. For the first time in years, I could see the back of my cabinets. As I cleared pathways through the living room, I noticed how unsafe I had been living. I had to admit it, the clutter wasn't just emotional, it was a physical hazard. So I made a new rule for myself, safety first. I focused on clearing walkways and staircases. No more squeezing sideways down the hallway. No more stepping over piles to reach the couch. Every time I looked at a clear path, I didn't just feel safer, I felt lighter. And then there were the unexpected discoveries. In an old book, tucked between pages, I found a savings bond one had completely forgotten about. It was like finding treasure, reminding me that sometimes letting go uncovers hidden blessings. And in a shoebox, buried beneath scarves, I found love letters from my late husband. I sat on the floor and read them one by one, tears streaming down my face. They reminded me why I fell in love with him in the first place, and for the first time in years, those letters didn't feel like anchors holding me back. They felt like wings, lifting me with gratitude. The more I cleared, the more momentum I built. What started as one drawer turned into an entire closet, then a room, and eventually the whole house. Each bag I carried out the door was a step toward reclaiming not just my space, but my life. For anyone watching this, especially if you're over 60, I want you to know, you don't have to do it all at once. Start with one drawer. Create your own legacy sorting system. Ask yourself, does this item still tell my story? Or is it keeping me stuck in yesterday? The process isn't just about letting go of things. It's about making room for health, safety, laughter, and love. And as I discovered, sometimes the most precious treasures aren't what you hold on to, but what you uncover along the way. My house changed, but more importantly, I changed. For years, the rooms had felt heavy, like they carried the weight of every sorrow and every loss I had tried to bury beneath boxes and piles. But as the clutter left, so did that heaviness. Dusty rooms turned into bright, open spaces. I began to notice details I hadn't seen in years. The way the sunlight danced across the living room wall in the morning, or how the hardwood floors still gleamed when they weren't hidden under clutter. My home started to breathe again, and in that breath, I found myself breathing easier too. The dining table was my proudest moment. For so long, it had been nothing more than a landing pad for mail, newspapers, and unfinished projects. I hadn't eaten a proper meal there in years. When I finally cleared it off, polished the wood, and set it with a simple vase of fresh flowers, it was like reclaiming a part of my identity. That table became the heart of my home again. It didn't stay empty for long. Soon, it was filled with my children and grandchildren, plates clattering, laughter echoing, and stories spilling across the room. For the first time in years, I felt what I had missed most: connection. But the real transformation wasn't just in the physical space, it was in my heart and mind. Before, I felt embarrassed to invite anyone inside. I worried what people would think if they saw the chaos. I kept my curtains closed so neighbors wouldn't glimpse the clutter. I lived in secrecy and shame. After decluttering, that embarrassment melted away. I opened the curtains. I let in light. I even opened my doors to neighbors again, inviting them in for coffee without feeling the need to apologize for the state of my home. I also noticed something I hadn't expected. I slept better. With clear floors and calm spaces, my mind finally quieted at night. I no longer lay awake thinking about the mess or feeling the guilt of another day gone without fixing it. Instead, I fell asleep with peace, knowing I had taken control. My home no longer drained me. It nourished me. And for anyone over 60 listening to this, I want you to know, transformation isn't just about cleaner spaces. It's about reclaiming your independence and dignity. I realized that my house wasn't meant to be a museum of the past. It was meant to be a living, breathing space for today. The more I let go, the more room I made for what truly mattered: Sunday dinners, grandkids' laughter, neighbors stopping by, and moments of quiet joy with a cup of coffee at a clear table. For the first time in years, I felt my home was no longer a prison of memories, but a sanctuary for living. And that shift, from shame to pride, from fear to freedom, was the true transformation I had been longing for all along. I learned that clutter wasn't love. For years, I convinced myself that holding on to everything meant holding on to the people and moments I cherished. But deep down, clutter was really fear. Fear of forgetting, fear of being forgotten, fear of letting go of the life I once had. Every object felt like a lifeline to my past, and I was terrified that if I released it, the memories would vanish with it. But the truth is, memories don't live in boxes or in stacks of paper. They live in our hearts, in our stories, and in the people who carry them forward. Letting go didn't erase my memories. It gave them room to breathe. Instead of being buried under dust and disorder, the moments that mattered most began to shine brighter. When I scanned old photographs and carefully saved my husband's letters in a special box, I realized I didn't need to keep every broken lamp or cracked plate to remember him. His presence lived in the love we shared, not in the clutter I hoarded. What I also discovered is that by clearing out, I was not only making space in my home, I was making space in my mind. Without the weight of all that stuff, I could think more clearly, rest more deeply, and live more freely. I was no longer defined by what I kept, but by the choices I made in the present. And for seniors like me, that choice is powerful. We don't have to drown in the past to honor it. We can honor it by living fully today. The greatest lesson was this: decluttering isn't about losing. It's about gaining freedom, gaining peace, gaining the ability to welcome others into your life again. It's about realizing that love is not measured in objects, but in the moments you create with the people who matter most. For me, decluttering wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the past has its place, but the present finally has room to bloom. My neighbors noticed my transformation long before I realized just how much it showed. One afternoon, a friend from across the street came by to drop something off. When I opened the door, she looked past me and said, "Mary, I can't believe how different your home feels. It's lighter, warmer." That simple comment reminded me that change doesn't just touch us personally, it radiates outward. Soon, neighbors began asking me what I had done and how I started. That's when I suggested a simple idea. Why not host a community donation day? We set a weekend aside, and before long, boxes and bags began appearing on porches up and down the street. What started as my private journey became a shared mission. People laughed as they carried out old furniture, swapped stories about items they once thought they'd never part with, and found comfort in letting go together. Some even said they had been too embarrassed to start until they saw me do it first. My one decision to reclaim my life ended up giving courage to others around me. The shift within my family was just as powerful. My children, who once worried about whether I could manage safely in my own home, began to relax. They no longer looked around nervously when they visited, concerned about stacks of boxes or cluttered hallways. Instead, they saw open paths, tidy rooms, and a space that welcomed their children to play. They stopped talking about assisted living and started talking about future holidays right here in my house. That peace of mind was one of the greatest gifts my decluttering journey gave them. And me. And here's the truth. Decluttering wasn't just about me. It became a ripple that reached into my neighborhood, my family, and even into the conversations I have now with all of you. That's why I want to ask you something personal. If you could only keep 10 items that truly tell your story, what would they be? Could you start choosing them today? Share your answers in the comments. I'd love to hear. Your story might be the spark that inspires someone else, just like mine did. Because sometimes, change begins with just one person daring to make space for life again. Now, every morning begins with coffee at a clear table. For years, that same table had been buried under piles of paper, old receipts, and half-finished projects. I can't describe the peace I feel when I sit down, place my cup on an open surface, and see sunlight streaming through the window without clutter blocking the view. It feels like my home is finally breathing, and because of that, I can finally breathe too. I wake up with sunlight on my face and peace in my heart. My home feels lighter, my mind feels calmer, and my life finally feels free. I never expected that the little changes would ripple into every part of my life. I cook more now because I can actually see my countertops. I invite friends over for coffee without scrambling to hide the mess. And the best part? My grandchildren come over more often. They play in the living room, run down the hallways without tripping, and giggle at the dining table that's now always ready for a family meal. The laughter in my home is the real treasure I uncovered when I let go of what no longer served me. One moment still makes me smile. I once sold an old vase at a yard sale for just a few dollars. At the time, I wondered if I'd regret it. Later, I learned it wasn't worth much at all. But what it left behind, the empty corner where it used to sit, became priceless. That corner is now where my granddaughter spreads out her coloring books and creates her own little world. That space, which used to hold dust, now holds memories in the making. It reminded me that sometimes the most valuable thing you can create is not keeping an object, but making space for love, joy, and connection. And if you're listening to this and thinking you're too old to start, let me tell you, you're not. I was 68 when I decided to let go of 90% of my life, and if I could do it, so can you. Don't wait for a fall, a doctor's warning, or a child's concerned voice to push you into action. Start now with one drawer, one closet, one decision at a time. The freedom waiting on the other side is worth it. So here's my invitation. Hype this video, hit like, share it with someone who's drowning in stuff, and subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because life after 60 isn't about holding on, it's about letting go and finally living free. Your home deserves to be a place of peace. And you deserve to live the rest of your story with space, light, and joy.